May 8th, 2024. Well, when we wait, as we wait around for what Marjorie Taylor Greene decides to do with her vacation order, other things have popped up on the radar, so to speak, and that is over to the war in Ukraine. And some somewhat disturbing developments have occurred. I think this ongoing thing of President Macron of France and his somewhat insane idea of trying to deploy French troops into Ukraine, it sounds to me to be a rather dangerous set of developments. Because the idea here would probably be something along the lines that they'd send a brigade of a couple of thousand French troops in, and then you'd start having other countries in NATO, maybe Poland or Romania, or the Baltic states might each send a battalion or something. And so you'd end up having a lot of NATO troops getting in there, and eventually the conflict with Russia and these NATO troops could escalate the thing into a war with between Russia and NATO. And that has some very dangerous implications for the safety of the world, to say the least. So that's kind of what I want to get into here and look at from a variety of points of view. And so one thing is that, of course, this hasn't exactly happened yet. There are troops from several countries, including the United States, and there is advisors or, helpers, so to speak, intelligence officers. I'm sure there's people in there doing a variety of functions. And there's a lot of probably are contractors in there too that are not officially in the militaries, but they're being paid, maybe working for the CIA or something like that. But they're actually deploying actual national troops, even the Foreign Legion, I think becomes an escalatory issue. And of course, I suppose the Russians will probably preferentially attack these units when they come in, because from the point of view of Russia, they see the same thing I just said, and obviously they want to deter other people to joining the party. So if the French send in troops, I think they will probably quickly be attacked, and therefore, perhaps convince other countries maybe they don't want to do that. Now, another thing about this is that it's unclear what the context of this is. One idea was that these troops might be on the west side of the Dnieper River, and so they would be, sort of try to draw a line in the sand, if you will. The Russians don't go any further than this, and of course the Russians are way back away from this for the most part. I mean, I don't think that Russia has any real offensive capability to directly cross the river into Odessa area or even Kherson. I mean, at this point, even when they're running free and during the early phase of the offensive, they were stopped short of Odessa. So, but that's one aspect of what this could be. And now we had Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat minority leader in the House, has been talking about the idea of deploying U.S. troops there, which is another level of escalation, obviously. So anyway, if you like these videos, please give me a like. I need more subscriptions, and of course, you can click the bell for notifications, and also you can look for me under the same name on Rumble if you're already a member of Rumble. Okay, so this is a kind of the risk we run now. Another thing, though, has happened recently. The Russians have now decided to increase their training and readiness to use tactical nuclear weapons, or as they call them, non-strategic nuclear weapons. So, and this would be things like warheads that would be on the Iskander missile, for example. It does come in a nuclear variant, or gravity bombs that would be dropped from fighter bombers, or potentially nuclear-tipped cruise missiles could be in that category as well. There's also lesser things like artillery shells, although I'm skeptical whether that's the direction they're likely to go, or they might. And we could, maybe discuss that. But what we've seen so far was some exercise in Belarus with an Iskander, I think. So that gives us, and of course, as I understand, several of the countries that we've mentioned before, other than France, immediately start saying, well, maybe we're not going to deploy troops into Ukraine just yet. So that may be a bit of a deterrent right there. I think the seriousness of this will be monitored more by actual actions in the field. That is, there are a lot of people in Russia that shoot their mouth off and make a lot of inflammatory comments, but there are also more serious things that are stated. Generally speaking, what Putin himself says is much more serious than what Mendeleev says. Like he seems to be the guy that says stuff like, "Yeah, we might bomb London, we might bomb Paris," but I don't believe they're going to bomb either London or Paris unless this thing turns into a full-scale disaster. What we're I mean, the basic rule of thumb here is don't attack a nuclear-armed country that has the ability to shoot back at you. That's a basic good rule of thumb here with nuclear weapons. I mean, that's kind of clear cut. And since Britain and France can both shoot back on their own authority without anybody else giving them permission, that's something to consider. At the same time, they're going to be very reluctant, I think, to initiate a first use of nuclear weapons against the Russians for the same reason, because they could be completely obliterated. So, that's kind of the way that would likely play out. But if they really are doing things like actually doing training exercises, actually working with the weapons or simulators, if they're actually maybe taking weapons back to the depot and having them processed to see if they're fully reliable and ready to go, anything like this would be a strategic warning that this is getting a little bit more to a serious level. My own opinion is that we're not likely to see nuclear use at the present time because for the moment Russia is on the offensive. For the moment they're winning. And until that changes, I think it's probably unlikely they'll do anything too radical. Of course, the latest statements of the British Foreign Minister saying go ahead and use the Storm Shadow missile and attack targets inside of the internationally recognized borders of Russia, I think are very provocative and a bad idea. A good idea would be to start negotiating, actually, and see what kind of deal they could get. I mean, obviously, if the Russians are completely intransigent, that's a different issue. But if they're open to some kind of a deal, then it might be smart to take it. I mean, General Milley suggested in the fall of 2022, I think around November, I believe it was, that where the Ukrainians advanced at that time and the situation they were in, that they were about in as good a position as they're likely to be, it might be a good time to negotiate while the Russians had not mobilized. Well, they didn't, and 18 months later, the Russians have mobilized. And they're in a totally better position than they were at that time, where they just brought up 300,000 people out of civilian life and tried to put them into military units. That didn't lead to a lot of good results very fast. But given time to build defensive lines, organize these units, and bring up more people and more volunteers, they now have a pretty large army. They've been able to increase their weapon production. They've been able to get artillery round supplies from the North Koreans. Maybe some of the North Korean missiles, maybe half of them don't work right, but if they're extra missiles and half of them do, that's still something to be concerned about. And so it doesn't look too good for maybe North Korea isn't sending their best either, if you know what I mean. Maybe they're sending some old stuff that may be near the end of its shelf life, that kind of thing. So at any rate, for the moment, I think this is more of a posturing thing still and a warning, but I think warnings should be taken seriously. And one thing I would also point out, I can't see a NATO force moving into Ukraine without being backed up by NATO Air Force. And it really, to me, is right now, for instance, the United States, I looked up as much as I can figure out, just Googling around on the internet. It looks like right now the United States has about 5 brigade equivalents in the European theater right now. And one of them is an understrength elite paratroop unit, the 173rd. There's, I think, a brigade of the 10th Mountain has replaced a brigade of the 101st Air Assault Division, and so forth. I think we have a mechanized infantry brigade or almost an armored unit with tanks and Bradleys and stuff back in Germany. I think that we've deployed forward, and there's a cavalry unit that's based on Strikers, which is a fast-moving, wheeled vehicle rather than a tracked vehicle. So anyway, I think that's what it looks to me like that we have there, plus some other support units, an anti-aircraft unit, and so forth. Um, which would be an interesting competition, but you get to see that in a brigade or two of French, and it's not enough to really beat the Russian army. It's more like a sort of a chip on our shoulder, daring anybody to knock it off. But they would back it up with air power, I'm sure, and it would be that NATO air power with things like F-22 aircraft, F-35s, the Typhoon fighter. Those vehicles would be very competitive with anything and superior in most cases to what Russia has. Their Meteor missile, our advanced D variant of the AMRAAM, things of that sort. That would give the Russians real hell, and that's why the possibility of using those nuclear tipped Iskanders to knock out the air bases, if they really got into serious engagements, could become quite tempting, as I pointed out in previous videos sometime back when I've discussed these issues. And of course, that leaves us with a very unattractive set of responses, because Russia does not have to attack the home country of any nuclear armed country, and I don't consider the NATO allies that, because of the two key system that presumably they may have possession of the bomb, but they don't have the permissive action link codes. So they need our approval to use them, and I don't think it's going to be forthcoming. And so, unless we decide to go that way, of course, but what I'm saying is we could hold it back. And the fact of the matter is that counter striking into Russia itself with nuclear weapons in areas that are near where some of their strategic forces are located and our early warning systems could be very escalatory and lead to a catastrophe where both sides would be destroyed. So I don't see an attractive option when we try to use nuclear weapons against fielded but widely dispersed Russian troops. I mean, again, we're going to blow up most of Ukraine trying to do that. It doesn't seem to be, again, a very attractive option. It's actually the offensive force. I mean, I'm just saying that the defensive force that has, fortified cities now, but I don't necessarily see even the Russians doing that. I think that it looks to me like it's not attractive to escalate to that. And they also have to ask, does the Biden administration are they really prepared to do that? I think their continual belief in that nuclear wars are fundamentally unwinnable or would be a major deterrent no matter how it looked. And so, because that might well be the response, I think that's why probably NATO is ultimately not going to intervene, although we'll have to see. But I definitely think we should all be opposed to that happening and should be for opening negotiations, which is my solution to the problem. I don't, for one thing, Russia's nowhere near conquering all of Ukraine at this point. They're way away from it. The concern may be that the attrition on the Ukrainian front line has reached a point where it might collapse, or at least in certain areas, and leave an opening for a serious breakthrough. And it might look like in the Donbass that may be starting to happen. There's also the idea that we're already, Putin has just been inaugurated, and of course, May the 9th is the Russian Victory Day, and so after that, there's some discussion of a potential major Russian offensive, although we're not sure what it's going to be, where it's going to happen. Kharkiv has been often discussed. Also, Sunni's been discussed. And the other idea would just be to reinforce their own movement in the Donbass. So any of those ideas could happen, and they may happen somewhere in mid to late May, because as the ground gets, hardened and get past the rainy season and things get, where it's not as muddy, the possibility of off-road maneuver becomes much more feasible. And so we might see this developing shortly, and that may be what causes all this, discussion in the West here, of, particularly with France and Britain and so forth. So far, Germany's been a little bit reluctant to get involved in any of this, and so, at any rate, that's kind of the way I see it. So I think it's something to watch out for, and hopefully it doesn't escalate too far. And hopefully someday, now that the aid has been approved, we'll see what impact that has. I mean, obviously, more ammunition and missiles and so forth are going to the Ukrainians, and we're still awaiting the deployment of the F-16s, which itself will be a major event, I guess, when it happens. So that's about it for now, and we'll just keep up with the situation, and I will be posting this both on YouTube and Rumble, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.